Hello, my name's Miss Waite, and I'm going to be your Year 5 home learning teacher for history. Let's get started. Let's make sure that we have everything we need to begin today's lesson. Are you ready? You'll need something to write with, a pen, a pencil, and something to write on. Maybe you've got a book that you can use, just some plain paper. Pause the video if you need to go and collect those items before we continue with the rest of today's lesson. At the beginning of each of our sessions, there'll be a short activity that you can complete on your own with a sibling or even with a member of your family. They're designed to get us thinking and ready for today's session. They'll be history linked and will have something to do with either today's learning or some learning that might happen later in the series of 10 lessons. Let's see what we've got today. What was invented first? Put these inventions in order from the first to the last. We've got sticky tape, the light bulb, the first powered flight, and the crossword puzzle. Feel free to stop the video now so you can have a little chat or have a think for yourself. Which one do you think was invented first? And which one was the last one to be invented? Let's have a look at the answers, see if you got them right. So in 1879, the light bulb was the first of our items to have been invented. Next up was the first powered flight in 1903. Third was the crossword puzzle in 1913. And the most recent of our inventions was sticky tape in 1929. This gives you a little bit of a hint as to the kinds of things we're going to be looking at in today's tasks. It's all about chronology. But before we get too stuck into today's lesson, I'd like to share with you the theme for this unit of work. And the theme is community. You may find that this theme has been cropping up in other subject areas as well. But in order for us to identify what community means and how it links to the history that we're going to be looking at, we need to make sure we've got a good understanding of what community means to us and what it means to the people around us. Have a read of the 6 phrases and ideas that are on the screen. Which ones do you think best describe what a community does? You can pick as many as you like, as long as you can justify the reasons for your choices. You may be able to come up with a better description. Let me read through them for you. Is a community about neighbours helping each other out? Do they smile at people they don't know to make them feel safe and welcome? Do they work together to change the area for the better? Do they celebrate together? Clean up public spaces, areas that everybody uses? And do they share news and event information to encourage and welcome everybody to join? Have you had any experiences of these phrases in your community? Pause the video now and take some time to think about whether your neighbours have helped you or whether you've done something to help your neighbours. Do you smile at each other when you walk past them in the street? Have you heard of any events that are going on in your local community? Have you taken part? What kind of celebrations might your community have done together? You may live in a community where some of these things aren't always visible. Maybe it's something that you can begin Think about the kinds of people that you might need to ask if you wanted to make these changes in your community. Let's look at exactly what we mean by what a community is. Here's a definition. It's a group of people who share the same things, such as where they live, where they work, or where they play. I found 3 images here that all link to this idea of community, but which one do you think best shows what a community is? Why do you think that? What is it about it? Are there particular parts of the picture that really confirm what a community is to you? Again, feel free to pause the video if you'd like the time to talk to either your sibling, a parent, or just have a think for yourself. Now, there are no right or wrong answers for this kind of a question. For me, I think I could see something in each one of these pictures that shares what the idea of community really is. In A, we can see 3 people here taking different parts of a jigsaw puzzle and helping each other to put them together. A community needs to be there for each other in order for it to thrive and flourish. Sometimes there are problems in the community and we all have to work together to solve them. In B, this image, there are lots of things that seem to share what a community is. You can see many different members of the community out and about, enjoying the space. And we can see here that the whole picture has been kind of shaped like a heart, a kind of symbol of love and cherishment. And that's very much what a community should feel like. Everybody has been involved and everybody is cared for. Maybe you can come up with what your image might be to represent what you feel a community is. For this history unit, over the next 10 lessons, we're going to be looking specifically at this theme of community, and we're going to be focusing on changes that have happened within living history and the impact that this has on national life. So there's a couple of things I want to pick out there. There's changes that have happened within living history. Living history is a period of time where we still have people alive today that can share these first-hand experiences and what it was like for them. And when we talk about the impact that this has had on national life, we're thinking about how it has changed maybe the thoughts, maybe the actions built across an entire nation, a country. But in order for us to really understand the event and the time that we're going to be looking at over these next 10 sessions, we need to have a really good idea about chronology, the order in which events take place, because there are other events that have an impact on our topic. They're the reason why it happened and a reason why we live the way we do today. So let's have a go today at practicing placing things in order from when they happened and building our understanding of the time in which we're going to be focusing on. Are you ready to travel back in time? We're going back in living history to 1947. That's 73 years, to a time when Britain was in need of some help. Let's go. What was going on in Britain in 1947? Okay, Britain was ruled by a king rather than a queen. In fact, the Queen's father, King George VI. The Second World War had ended just 2 years before 1947, so back in 1945. Britain, as a country, was in a bit of a state and it needed rebuilding, quite literally, its cities and its industry. Britain was also hit by some of the coldest winters in recorded history. And there are records of this from 1946, 1947, 1948. There seems to have been a very cold spell that hit our shores. And you can see there in the pictures quite how much snow seemed to be battering Britain at the time. Further afield, and we'll find out more about this later, but Britain still had quite a large empire. However, in 1947, India, who had up until that point, for a short period of time, been under the rule of the British monarchy, had gained its independence, and British rule had ended. So we talked earlier about how we had a king at the time of 1947, King George VI. His daughter, Princess Elizabeth, who will go on to become our Queen Elizabeth, married Prince Philip in that year. And of course, if you know of the Rocket Man himself, Elton John was born. And in 1947, 2 years after the Second World War, where the nation that's trying to rebuild itself, the idea of the National Health Service, the NHS, has started to come underway. And in another year's time, in 1948, the NHS will be up and running. So some big things about to happen in this nation. Let's have a little go, knowing some of those things that happened in 1947, to start to place that year in our understanding of world history and British history up until that point. We need to start ordering events in our minds and beginning to understand what maybe life was like before this time and what life was like after this time. I'm going to share with you a few different events, and I want you to think about whether or not they came before 1947 or after 1947. It's okay if you don't get it right the first time. That's all part and parcel of building our understanding of chronology. Let's have a look at the first one. So the Second World War. I've chosen something we've mentioned already. Have a little think back to what we've just spoken about the events of 1947. Where would it go? Before or after? That's right, it goes beforehand. So 1939 to 1945. And you'll remember from the previous slide that in 1947, we clearly stated that the Second World War had ended just 2 years before. What's up next? Now, for some of you out there, you'll definitely have covered this topic. For some of you, there might be something coming up soon. Henry VIII was King of England, and you can see him there right in the middle with the images of his 6 wives around the outside. But did he rule England before or after 1947? There we go. Definitely before. From 1491 to 1547. Next up, When was the first man on the moon? Was this before 1947 or after 1947? There they are. 1969, after 1947. For some of you, you may have grandparents or maybe parents that are able to remember that event and watching it for the first time on TV. Next up, when did London host the Olympics? Now, the Olympics traditionally happen every 4 years, 2020 being a year that we were meant to see the Olympic Games, but unfortunately that hasn't happened. But when was it hosted in London? Was it before 1947 or after? Now, here's an answer that crops up quite a few times on our timeline. My first reaction is always to say after, because it's the one that I remember back in 2012 when they were hosted in London. Many of us felt very patriotic that year and watched it and celebrated it all over Britain. But it was also hosted in 1948, so just after 1947. And London also hosted the Olympics back in 1908 as well. So here's an event that happened both before and twice after 1947. Your task today is to continue this idea of chronology and building that understanding of where things happened when. And I'd like you to create your own timeline using 5 events ranging from the 1900s to the year 2000. You can choose any 5 things that you'd like to place onto your timeline. Where could you get the information from? You could use the internet, any books that you might have at home. That includes non-fiction mainly. You might be able to find a few real life events that happened that are being explained in fiction books too. Or you could simply have a conversation with members of your family. I'm sure they've got plenty of things that they could share. Some tips to get you started. If you're not quite sure what types of things you'd like to put onto your timeline, start with what you're interested in. If you love football, for example, build your own timeline about the history of the England football kit or iconic moments in the sport or members of that community. If you're interested in other cultures or countries, you could find out about what was happening in that country at that time. Maybe there were some celebrations that happened. Maybe there were some things that maybe weren't so pleasant, but are important that we know about them. Once you've chosen, draw up your own timeline clearly on a blank piece of paper or jot them down in your notebook. If you really want to go for it, you could collate some pictures and images to add to your timeline. Have fun, and I'll see you again tomorrow for our second lesson, where we find out exactly what our topic is all about. Here's a little clue to get you thinking.